We are going to understand about the developmental practices and appraisal of India. India as a country has been an example for many other countries in terms of development. Why did China introduce structural reforms in 1978? If you want to develop a system, if you want to build a system, you need to be highly careful enough. Good morning and welcome to the fifth session of Chapter 10, Comparative Development Experiences of India and its Neighbours. This is going to be the concluding session where we are going to understand about the developmental practices and appraisal of India with its neighbours. So let's get quickly into the session and try to understand what are the different factors that we have been working upon. So let's go forward and let's try to understand here. Now, it is common to find the developmental strategies of a country as a model for others, a lesson or a guidance for their own development. Now, why is this important for us to understand? India as a country has been an example for many other countries in terms of development program and the policies. Similarly, India has also taken ideas from China, from other countries in terms of building up their own developmental strategies. So on the whole, I would like to say that the entire factor of development strategies is a whole together a learning experience. Everybody will try to share their model, will try to share their experience one against the another, which will make the experience even more enriching in nature. So that's why I say that the development strategies are very, very important for each one of us to know. It is particularly evident that after the introduction of reform process in the different parts of the world. Now, when you look at the Western countries like the Americas, the European countries, they all had reforms or developmental practices hundreds of years before we started. So what happened for them is that the path of progress, the path of development started at a very early stage altogether. But for India, for China, and for Pakistan, we got our independence in the late half of the 19th century. So we had to start the development process and the policies at a later stage altogether. So that was one of the reasons the reform process actually evidently gave out a progress path, and it said that yes, we can also develop like other countries in the world. In order to learn from the economic performance of our neighboring country, it is necessary to have an understanding of the roots of their success and failures. Now, when you try to understand China, you need to understand not just from the success story or just the model itself. You need to understand the root cause analysis. Why did China become a manufacturing hub? How did China overcome the strategy in terms of the population problem? Or how did they overcome in terms of education, in terms of healthcare? So when you compare a country and want to adopt those models to your country, you should have studied the entire history. You should have understood how the country has made a stepwise progress altogether. So that is very, very important for each one of us to understand and to take it forward in terms of the model building exercise. Similarly, it is also necessary to distinguish between and contrast the different phases of the strategy. Quite obvious for all of us to know. Why? Because if you start understanding the process of development, the process of growth altogether, we always wanted to come up in the way of development. We always wanted to understand how this development can happen, how we can take things forward altogether. So in that sense, in that belief, in that order altogether, We are people who have understood the developmental path in a very, very simple manner. We just wanted to go in a very, very subtle, simple manner. We wanted to distinguish between the different phases of strategy. We wanted to be having a distinguished ID, a unique performance altogether. And that's what it was very, very immediate necessity for us to understand this developmental path altogether. Now, though the countries go through their development phase differently, definitely yes. Why? Because the pace at which China went through or the pace at which Pakistan went through was not the same pace that we had gone. We went in a different strategy altogether. We understood the developmental path in a different way. So what comes in the picture, what needs to be understood very, very clearly is that at a given point of time, at a given level altogether, all this initiation has definitely led to the path of success. So we had to take reforms to a point, to a particular junction where we could make it as a reference model for others. We know that reforms were initiated in China in 1978, Pakistan in 1988, and in India 1991. Now I'm just going to write down these dates for our reference. Just look at the chronological order in which we have gone through: 78, 88 and 91. Now look at it. China had an earlier advantage. 13 years before India could start thinking about development, China started development. 10 years from there, Pakistan started its development. 3 years from there, India started its development. So you can see that there has been a time gap. There has been a distinguished path altogether where India versus China versus that of the other countries have taken its own pace altogether. But then we were ready to take it forward. We were ready to make it even more progressive. And that's what we have done. That's what we have taken the path altogether. So this is very, very important for each one of us to understand and take it in the sense that we could probably make a distinguished model altogether. Now, so the development strategy appraisal is that at a given point of time, you need to understand the country's background, how they have come through and how they have been able to make a progress. So that is where you will be able to understand the comprehensive factor behind the developmental strategies. Now, moving forward, the factor, I'm going to start here with a question. Why did China introduce structural reforms in 1978? Now, if you look at that question in depth, the answer to that is China did not have any compulsion. No way, because China was an independent country. China did not have the need or the push or the urge that they had to do that particular activity. But then, as dictated by the World Bank, because they didn't want to do it as dictated by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund to India and Pakistan. Now, look at this factor. For India and Pakistan, there were dictators. There were people who were putting pressure onto India and Pakistan, saying that when we are giving you funds, you better start up. They were dependent on external agencies to start this nation and take it forward. But for China, it was an independent nation, not just from the physical presence, but also from the financial interpretation altogether. So China did not have the pressure. China did not have to go through the same process as India and Pakistan had to do. But still, China went through this. Why? Because of the leadership that happened at that point of time. When Mao Zedong came into power, he started identifying the new China. He wanted the youths to be educated, employed, and even be more productive in nature. So that's where, when we see this, the new leadership at the time of China was not happy with the pace of growth. So Mao Zedong was not just happy with the factor that China can be a slow-paced country. China could take its own time in development. That was not accepted by them. Rather, he wanted the Chinese economy to pick up the pace. He wanted the Chinese economy to zoom forward so that they would be able to lead the world in future. So that is where, under the Maoist rule, so I would definitely say that the Chinese economy was going down, but then they wanted to pull it up. So they had a voluntary push altogether, and then they started coming up. They felt that the Maoist vision of economic development is based on decentralization. So they wanted that. Decentralize the nation. No more holding back. No more going back to the government, falling at its feet and saying that we are dependent on you. We want an independent, privatized economy which can start working on its own, which will have the concept of self-sufficiency, what we call it as Atmanirbhar today. They had spoken about that Atmanirbhar in the form of self-sufficiency 20, 30 years back. And they were the people who were shunning the foreign technology, goods and capital had failed. Why? Because they were feeling that, they don't just want to stick or depend on others. They wanted to develop their own. They wanted to go on the factors where China could become a production head altogether. Despite extensive land reforms, collectivism, the Great Leap Forward and the other initiatives, per capita input was the same as in the mid-1950s. So somewhere down the lane, the programs were not really pushing up well. So that was the reason why China went back and said that we have to bring in infrastructural reforms. We have to bring in some sort of development so that the country can make a greater advancement, a greater progress altogether. So if you look at the overall picture, though China had policies and programs of its own discomfort, its own feeling that we are not moving forward made it to start take up the structural reform. So China as a country is definitely a powerful nation which has decided on the path of development by its own. It did not depend on any other external agencies for development. So that is the most brilliant part that we need to learn from the developmental strategy as far as it goes. Now, moving forward, scholars will also argue on the part that Pakistan, the reform process led to worsening of all economic indicators. Quite true. Why? Because somewhere down the lane, Pakistan could not hold back to its economic indicators. Pakistan was trying to reform, was trying to come on the path of development, but unfortunately, Pakistan felt for the factor that their economic indicators was not working. They had a lot of turbulence in terms of governance, in terms of leadership, in terms of political issues, and facts like terrorism and other things, which had definitely gone back and hit Pakistan on a bad side. So altogether, what happened is that Pakistan's economic development came down to a halt altogether. Though the data on international poverty line for Pakistan is quite healthy. That's what I was telling you in the previous classes, that the poverty line in Pakistan is definitely better than that of India and other countries. But still, using the official data of Pakistan indicate that the rising poverty is there. So somewhere down the line, Pakistan had tried to come up, but then the data, the system, the way how to bring it out, the process was not working up for them. So that was the reason why Pakistan came down in the race of economic development altogether. Now, moving forward, the reasons of the slowdown altogether, the growth and the re-emergence of poverty in Pakistan's economy, as scholars argue, they are primarily because of the agricultural growth and the food supply situation were based not on an institutionalized process, as I told you, the process and system of technical change, but on good harvest. So somewhere down the lane, if you read through here, the slowdown for growth and the re-emergence of poverty in Pakistan's economy is primarily because the agricultural growth and the food supply situation were based not on a process, not on any technology, but just on a good harvest. So suppose if the harvest did not happen up to the levels, if the harvest was not up to the mark, the benchmark fell down badly, then automatically what would happen here is that the Pakistan's economy will again start crashing downwards. So then somewhere down the lane, again, the question will start coming to your mind is that why is Pakistan not able to come up? Because they didn't follow any technology. They didn't have a process or system that was well built that could take care of the economy. On the other hand, Pakistan was only trying to understand the factor of the common process. They just left agriculture to the convention of the nature. So whatever harvest used to happen, that was good enough for them. But if the harvest has to be done in a proper manner, following some technology, that did not happen in Pakistan. When there was a good harvest, the economy was in good condition, and when it was not, as I told you, economic indicators show stagnation or negative trend. So now when you leave the system to the hands of nature and you don't take any efforts to rebuild the system, to put the system back in position or in play, automatically the system collapses. So that is why it is very, very important for each one of us to understand this factor that if you want to develop a system, if you want to build a system, you need to be highly careful enough in building up that system. Then only you will be able to go forward and make the system even more proactive, even more stronger altogether. Now, moving forward, the conclusion part of this chapter, which is very, very interesting for all of us to know, what is the end solution here? India, Pakistan and China, as I keep telling you, the three nations have similar physical endowments but totally different political systems. India, the largest democratic, Pakistan, more of an autocratic because it's ruled by the military rulers. China, more of a communism. So different political systems. Three countries, three different political systems and three different ways of development. Reforms were introduced in China 78, 88 in Pakistan and 91 in India. I want you to remember these three dates. Why? Because it's very, very important from the exam standpoint and also from the general knowledge standpoint. So the reforms that were introduced, 78 in China, 88 in Pakistan and 91 in India. China's industrial sector had maintained a high growth rate while that of India and Pakistan did not, because China's emphasis on industrial development infrastructure was way ahead of India and Pakistan, so they developed it at a faster rate. This also led to the rapid increase of GDP per capita in China, no doubt about it, because when you are going forward in terms of development, in terms of GDP, in terms of growth rate altogether, definitely China would make a better income compared to that of India and Pakistan altogether. So that is one factor that you need to understand and you need to appraise altogether. Now, moving forward, with this, we come to the conclusion of chapter 10, that is the comparative development experiences of India and with its neighbor. I hope and believe that this chapter was highly interesting, useful, and informative. Now, the main thing in this chapter is that though it has got long theory, though it has got a lot of explanations altogether, but as a student, as a person belonging to the economics fraternity, we need to learn a lot about India and the neighboring countries. The economies of each and every one nation surrounding India, including our own country, will play a vital role in the global development. So as a student, you need to learn these concepts thoroughly and you need to see how you are able to apply these concepts both from a theory standpoint as well as from a practical standpoint. Meet you in the next session. Until then, a goodbye and thank you from my side. Thank you once again for joining me today.